Welcome again. Starving state. Starving state. Fasting state. You have not eaten anything. There is no glucose in the blood. But still, two organs need glucose. And what are those two organs? Brain and red blood cell. Brain and red blood cells cannot live without glucose. They need constant supply of glucose. All the rest of the things can live without glucose. But brain and red blood cells are not going to live without glucose. Right? So there is, as I explained there, the major hormone during the well-fed state is insulin. But there is not one hormone in the starving state or in the fasting state. Rather, there are three major hormones. Three major hormones in the fasting state. Now, number one, glucagon. Glucagon. From where it is produced? Pancreas. Yes. The second, cortisol. Third, catecholamines. Epinephrine. Adrenaline. Right? Yeah. So, three major hormones. See that? Which are responsible for the fasting state. Three major hormones responsible for the fasting state. Glucagon. Epinephrine. But if you are living in UK, that is going to become adrenaline. And the third thing is cortisol. Right? In addition, there are two other hormones which raises the glucose level, and those are thyroxine, but they have not that significant role, and the growth hormone. Major hormones, number one, number two, number three. So there are five hormones which are elevating the glucose level, and there is one hormone only which decreases the glucose level. So it means important to understand. See here. Important to understand. Hyperglycemia, no dangerous, no problem. You can live for another 10 years with hyperglycemia. But with hypoglycemia, probably one day. So that's why there are five hormones to prevent hypoglycemia, to elevate the glucose level. Number one, glucagon. Number two, cortisol. Number three, epinephrine or adrenaline. And number four, thyroid hormone. Number five, growth hormone. Right? Important to understand. These five hormones are raising the glucose level to ensure the constant supply of glucose to the brain and red blood cells. Right? Yeah. So, when we are fasting, these are the hormones that are important. Understand them. Fine. Now we come and see. So, whatever is happening in the brain and red blood cells in the well-fed state, that will remain the same in the fasting state. Right? Important thing is, hypoglycemia is more dangerous than hyperglycemia. Right? And the metabolism that was there in the well-fed state for brain and red blood cell, that will remain the same in the starving state as well. See that? I'm just replicating it. See that here. Brain. Same glucose is entering into the brain. That same glucose is going to make pyruvate. That same pyruvate is going to make acetyl-CoA. And that same acetyl-CoA is going to make carbon dioxide and ATP. And similarly, the same glucose go to the red blood cells. Glucose makes pyruvate, but here, as it doesn't have mitochondria, the pyruvate is not going to make acetyl-CoA, rather it makes lactate, right? But the story is altogether different in the liver. Oh, sometimes it happens, no worries. The story in the liver is altogether different. Now glucose is not entering into the liver, rather glucose will get out of the liver. Alright? In the well-fed state, glucose enters into the liver, but in the fasting state, glucose is released out of the liver. From how? How? First of all, glucose, there is glycogen present in the liver. That glycogens break down to make glucose. Can I ask a question? Yeah. Which hormone is responsible for the breakdown of glycogen to glucose? Which hormone is responsible for breakdown of glycogen to glucose? Glucagon, cortisol, epinephrine. Right? Yeah. Because these are the major hormones. So glycogenolysis. Right. Alright. But we stop this story here and we come back to the adipose tissue. And here comes the important role of adipose tissue during the fasting state. There is a lot of fat stored in the adipose tissue. This fat is activated by an enzyme. What is that enzyme called? Hormone sensitive lipase. And now can you tell me which hormone is responsible for activating hormone sensitive lipase? Again, glucagon, cortisol. So this fat breaks down and it becomes fatty acid and glycerol. Right? Now this fatty acid comes to the blood. As long as it remains in the blood, it is attached with albumin because it cannot travel independently. And then it enters to the liver. Now it is broken down and it makes what? Acetyl-CoA. Right? And then acetyl-CoA enters into the Krebs cycle to make what? Carbon dioxide and ATP. Now you see, liver is getting energy in the starving state not from the glucose, rather from the fatty acids. Liver is getting energy from fatty acids in the starving state, not from the glucose. Another thing that is coming into the liver from the adipose tissue is glycerol. And that this glycerol makes glucose. Right? This is called gluconeogenesis. This is called gluconeogenesis. And you see amino acids. But from where there are amino acids, these amino acids coming? These amino acids are coming from the breakdown of proteins. Now in the muscles, the proteins break down. They break down to make what? Amino acid. And this amino acid goes to the blood. From the blood it goes to the liver. And in the liver, it makes urea. But it also makes pyruvate. And that pyruvate makes glucose. Alright? And this acetyl-CoA also make ketone bodies. Acetyl-CoA makes ketone bodies. Sexy name. Ketone bodies. There are 3 ketone bodies. Sexy name. Ketone bodies. Acetone. What? Acetone. Acetoacetate. And 3-hydroxybutyrate. All are formed from acetyl-CoA. In the starving state. Now these ketone bodies gets out of the liver, enters to the blood, goes to the muscles and make acetyl-CoA again. and that acetyl-CoA makes carbon dioxide and ATP. So you see that ketone bodies are providing energy in the fasting state. And this fatty acid that is coming from the adipose tissue, that fatty acid also goes to the muscles, breaks down to make acetyl-CoA, and acetyl-CoA makes carbon dioxide and ATP. So you see that in the fasting state, muscles are also getting energy not from the glucose, rather from the fatty acids and ketone bodies. But liver produces ketone bodies, but it never uses them. Liver is the sole manufacturer of ketone bodies, but it never uses these ketone bodies. Right. So you understand? See that? So formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like glycerol, like pyruvate, like lactate. Formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources is called gluconeogenesis. And that gluconeogenesis is responsible for the sole export of glucose from the liver to the brain and red blood cells. So the constant supply of glucose is ensured by gluconeogenesis as well as glycogenolysis. Oh, what are you talking about? All these things are really very cumbersome. We can't understand these things. This is really interesting. See that? In just one line. The metabolism of red blood cell and the brain will remain same, whether this is starving state or whether this is a well-fed state. These things don't care. Whether you have eaten something or you have not eaten something, they just need constant supply of glucose. But there is no glucose after 16 hours of fast. So now there should be some source of glucose. And that source of glucose is fat and protein. Protein breaks down to make amino acids, and then those amino acids make glucose. Fats break down to make glycerol, and then those glycerol are making glucose. So the formation of glucose from these non-carbohydrate sources ensures the constant supply of glucose to brain and red blood cells. The rest of the things now use energy not from the glucose but from the fatty acids, right? By the beta oxidation of fatty acids. Liver get energy by the beta oxidation of fatty acids. Muscles get energy by the beta oxidation of fatty acids. And even the adipose tissue gets energy by the beta oxidation of fatty acids, right? So the major source of energy for the rest of the cells are the fatty acids in the starving state, while in the well-fed state, that is glucose. You now understand? Right? Yeah. So the protein is broken down to produce glucose, right? By the process what is the process? Gluconeogenesis. Clear? Important thing, where are ketone bodies synthesized? In the liver. Now, a question. There is no insulin. So, cells will feel they are starving because no glucose is entering into them. When no glucose is entering into the cells will feel that they are starving, and then they will start breaking fatty acids. And once the fatty acids are broken down, they will start producing ketone bodies. Right? That is a problem with the diabetes. In the diabetes, although there is a lot of glucose in the blood, but the cells are starving. And they behave as if they are in the starving state. So we have to understand this metabolism. Right? I hope this is clear. Now same, and the fatty acids come here, back to this. Fatty acids are broken down to make acetyl-CoA in the adipose tissue. And then that acetyl-CoA is going to make carbon dioxide and ATP. So what is the source of energy during the fasting state for the adipose tissue? Fatty acids. For the liver, fatty acids. For the muscles, fatty acids and ketone bodies. Okay? And here the glucose is now being exported out of the liver rather than coming into the liver. And this glucose is made partly from the breakdown of glycogen and partly from the breakdown of proteins and the breakdown of fats. So the formation of glucose from fats and proteins is called gluconeogenesis. Now you see that in this pathway we have studied the rest of the metabolism. We will study the beta oxidation of fatty acids. We will study the ketone body formation. We will study the protein breakdown. We will study the gluconeogenesis. We will study glycogenolysis. We will study how ketone bodies make again acetyl CoA. How are the fats broken down to make fatty acids and glycerol? Lipolysis. So all these cycles we will study and pathways we will study in the next. Now if I ask from you, where does lipolysis take place? Adipose tissue. Where is the beta oxidation of fatty acid takes place? Muscles, liver, adipose tissue. Glycogenolysis takes place where? Muscles and liver. Ketone bodies are formed where? Liver. Right? So understand this. If you understand this big picture, understanding biochemistry will become very easy. Right? Thank you so much. Bye bye. Have any question? Ask me. Bye bye.